my children said. You're too old to manage this. They sent me to a nursing home and tried to sell my property for $450,000. I still remember the sound of the clock in my kitchen that afternoon. Tick, 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 like a judge tapping a gavel. The whole house smelled faintly of peaches because I had baked a pie that morning, out of habit more than anything. I didn't expect company. Baking had always been a way to steady my nerves, to keep my hands moving when my heart was restless. That pie sat untouched on the counter, its crust splitting as it cooled, while my life was about to do the same. Mark came in first, my eldest. He had his father's shoulders but none of his patience. His shirt was starched so stiff it looked like it might crack if he bent too quickly. Behind him, Linda followed, my only daughter, always rushing, though she wore a smile that looked almost rehearsed. They didn't come alone. They brought with them a weight, something heavy in the air that made the kitchen feel smaller. "Mom," Mark said, taking the chair across from me. He folded his hands on the table like he was about to give a presentation at work. "We need to talk." That phrase, "we need to talk," isn't one you want to hear from your children when you're 72 years old. I smoothed the edge of my apron, suddenly aware of the flour smudges on my skirt. Linda touched my arm, her voice soft, the way you talk to someone fragile. "You've been doing too much, Mom. The property, the tenants, the paperwork. It's all just too much at your age. We worry about you." At my age, the words hit me like a stone. I had lived long enough to see my hair silver, my skin map itself with lines and spots, but inside I was still myself. I still kept up with the house, knew which tenant was late on rent, which faucet needed tightening. I wasn't helpless. Not yet. "I'm fine," I said, maybe a little too firmly. But Mark was ready for that answer. "You deserve rest," he replied, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. "We've found a place for you. Just temporary. Somewhere safe, where you'll get the treatment and attention you need. You won't have to worry anymore." The word temporary stuck to me. Sweet, reassuring. Temporary meant I'd be back home soon. Still, I felt something shift in my chest, a whisper of unease. Then Mark slid a stack of papers across the table. Legal documents. Clean clipped, too many words in too small print. And a pen. Always the pen. "Just sign, Mom," Linda urged. "This way we can take care of things while you're resting. It's just a formality." I looked down at the papers. My eyes blurred on the lines of text, the way they always do when my glasses aren't strong enough. I wanted to read every word to make sense of it, but the print might as well have been in another language. Mark leaned forward, tapping the page where my name was supposed to go. "We'll handle everything," he said. "You've earned a break." I should have stopped right then. I should have asked questions, called a lawyer, or simply refused. But the truth is, I was tired. That week my knees had been aching, and my back throbbed each night after climbing the stairs. Fatigue is a sly enemy, and in my weariness, their words sounded almost like kindness. So I took the pen. My hand shook as I signed, and the ink looked darker than usual, like a scar appearing in real time. For a long moment afterward, the kitchen fell into silence. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the pie crust crack, and the clock tick on the wall. My children exhaled, not like people relieved of worry, but like gamblers who had just won the pot. Linda patted my hand with that too bright smile. "You'll thank us later, Mom." I smiled back because I didn't know what else to do. The rest of the day moved quickly, too quickly for me to catch up. Linda began tidying up my things without asking, moving through the house like a brisk wind. Mark made phone calls in the living room, his voice low but clipped, like business was already underway. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my pie. It had cooled completely by then, the crust dull and uninviting. No one had touched it. By evening they told me to pack a bag. "Just for a week or two," Linda promised. "Take only what you need. We'll bring you anything else later." I went upstairs to my bedroom. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I'd tucked into the drawers years ago. My bedspread was neatly folded back, the same quilt I'd had for decades, stitched with patches of fabric from old dresses and baby clothes. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around, wondering if this was the last time I'd see the room just as it was. I pulled out my small suitcase, the one with the worn handle from years of trips and visits. Into it, I placed my nightgown, a cardigan, a few blouses, and my Bible. I added my photo album, the one with the black and white pictures of my parents, my wedding day, the children when they were young and still clung to me like I was their whole world. My hands lingered on the photographs longer than I meant to. Downstairs, Mark was waiting, keys jangling in his hand. Linda stood by the door, her purse on her arm, ready to shepherd me along like a child on the first day of school. I glanced once more at the house, my house. The familiar creak of the stair rail, the scent of peaches, the sun slanting across the living room rug. All of it was mine, built from years of sweat, savings, and stubbornness. And yet, at that moment, it no longer felt like mine. I lifted my suitcase, heavier than it should have been, and walked to the door. With each step, I whispered to myself the word they had given me, temporary. It was supposed to be temporary. And with that, I left. The car ride to the nursing home felt longer than it really was. My suitcase sat at my feet, and I kept one hand on it, as though holding it could anchor me. Mark drove, eyes fixed on the road, tapping his thumb on the steering wheel in rhythm with the turn signal. Linda sat in the front seat, scrolling on her phone, not saying much. I tried to look out the window, but the streets blurred together, every turn pulling me further from the life I knew. We pulled up to a tall brick building with clean windows and trimmed hedges. Out front, a sign with painted letters read Willow Pines Care Center. Someone had tried to make it look cheerful, flowers and planters, a little bench by the walkway, but there was no disguising what it really was. It wasn't home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and something sweeter, like lavender sprayed too often. The floors shined almost too much, reflecting the fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. A woman at the front desk greeted us with a practiced smile, the kind you wear for strangers. She slid a clipboard toward me, though Mark was quick to take it, signing my name where hers had already been written. "This is just a short stay," Linda assured me, her voice syrupy. "A week or two at most." I nodded because nodding was easier than asking questions. They wheeled my suitcase down a wide hallway lined with doors. Some were open, revealing tidy rooms with hospital-style beds and small dressers. The walls were painted a pale yellow, the kind of color that was supposed to be warm but only reminded me of faded wallpaper from old motels. My room was at the end of the hall, number 213. A single bed, narrow, with sheets so stiff they could have stood on their own. A dresser, a chair, and a small window that looked out on a patch of grass with a stone birdbath in the middle. There was no sound of children laughing, no clatter of footsteps on my old stairwell, no smell of peaches cooling on the counter. Just quiet. Mark set my suitcase by the dresser. Linda smoothed the bedspread as if that act alone proved their care. "You'll be comfortable here," she said brightly. "They've got everything you need, meals, nurses, activities. Think of it as a little vacation." Vacation. The word made me want to laugh, though no sound came out. Vacations had been road trips with my late husband, when we'd pack sandwiches in a cooler and drive until we found some little town worth exploring. Vacations had been sandy beaches, sticky with salt water, or mountain cabins where we'd sit by a fire and read old paperbacks. This room was no vacation. It was a holding cell dressed up with curtains. They didn't stay long. Mark kissed my forehead, quick and distracted, already half turned toward the door. Linda promised to call that evening. Then they were gone, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and the hollow thud of the closing door. I sat on the bed, hands folded in my lap, staring at the suitcase. It felt strange being in a room where nothing belonged to me. Back home, every object carried a memory. The quilt on my bed stitched from dresses my children once wore. The dent in the wooden floor where the Christmas tree had stood each December. The crack in the banister my husband never got around to fixing. Here there was nothing. Just beige walls and silence. The first night I told myself over and over, temporary. Just a week or two. I tried to believe it the way a child tries to believe in fairy tales, clinging to the comfort of the story even when the truth is whispering in the dark. Meals were served in a large dining room with square tables covered in plastic cloths. The food was plain. Mashed potatoes that tasted like paste, green beans cooked to mush, chicken so dry I nearly choked on it. I missed my own cooking, the way I used to season pots with herbs from the garden, the way the kitchen filled with warmth when bread was in the oven. Here everything was bland. The nurses were kind enough, their shoes squeaking down the halls, their voices polite but distant. They asked if I needed help bathing, if I wanted to join bingo night, if I felt comfortable. I nodded, though inside I didn't feel comfortable at all. I felt displaced, like a puzzle piece pressed into the wrong box. I waited for my children to call. That first night I kept my phone close on the nightstand, glancing at it every few minutes. No call came. The second day I told myself they were busy, that life was demanding. By the third day I realized something colder. Their voices had already faded from my daily life. Each evening the halls grew quieter, until all I could hear was the distant murmur of televisions behind closed doors and the hum of the air conditioner. Lying in that narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought of my house, the 3 stories of it, with its crooked windows and stubborn pipes. I thought of the tenants who waved when they saw me on the porch, who brought me jars of jam or flowers from the market. My life had been full, not grand but full. And here it felt like a balloon slowly losing its air. That seed of doubt began to grow. My children had said this was for my own good, that it was only temporary. But each passing day without a visit, without a call, chipped away at that trust. I began to wonder, not just if they had done this too quickly, but if they had done it for reasons they hadn't spoken aloud. On the 4th evening, I sat at the window watching the sun sink behind the trees. The birdbath outside was empty, save for a single crow perched on the edge. The room felt colder than it should, though the thermostat read 72. I pressed my palms together, whispering a prayer for strength. And that's when the thought came to me, sharp and uninvited. Why do I feel more forgotten here than I ever did at home? It was on a Tuesday evening just after supper, when the truth began to crack open. Supper had been meatloaf with watery gravy and mashed carrots that tasted like nothing. I had eaten half my portion, then pushed the tray away. Food has a way of telling you where you belong. And this food told me, plain and simple, that I was not home. I wheeled my little cart of dishes down the hall, walking slowly because my knees were stiff. The common room was quiet except for a television buzzing with a game show. A few of the other residents dozed in their chairs, heads tilted back, mouths slightly open. I felt like I was drifting among strangers, invisible. That's when I saw him, the young orderly Daniel. He was tall, with dark hair that always seemed a little too long for the rules here, curling at the collar. He had a kind face, the sort that softens when you speak, and I had noticed early on that he treated the residents differently. Less like chores, more like people. He smiled at me as he passed, pushing a laundry cart. "Evening, Mrs. Harper," he said. "Evening, dear," I replied, managing a smile. I went back to my room, sat by the little window, and tried to distract myself with the book. The words blurred, though. My thoughts kept wandering to my house, the creak of the wooden stairs, the laughter of tenants echoing through the halls, the way the city lights glowed just beyond the windows at night. My house was more than a building. It was my independence, my proof that I still mattered. It was then, around 7, that I heard voices drifting down the hall. First I thought nothing of it. Families often called, and staff didn't always close doors tight. But the sound grew clearer, sharper. I caught my son Mark's voice, low-clipped, full of the same confidence he used when making decisions on my behalf. She'll never know, Linda. It's already in motion. The buyers agreed. Deposit's been made. My heart stuttered. I set my book aside, leaning closer to the door. Linda's voice followed, smooth as silk. Once the sale goes through, we'll split the down payment. You can finally get that car you wanted. I've already looked at one, the dealer's holding it. There was a laugh then, quick and greedy. The kind of laugh that didn't belong to the children I once rocked to sleep. I felt cold. Colder than I'd ever felt in that place. I pressed my palm against the dresser to steady myself. My children, my own children, weren't talking about me, about my health or my comfort. They were talking about my house. Selling it. Spending the money. I must have made a sound because suddenly the voices stopped. I heard a shuffle, then silence. A knock came at my door a minute later. Daniel peeked in, his laundry cart still in the hall. His expression was careful, as if he'd been weighing something. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly, "you might want to sit down." I was already sitting, but my knees nearly gave way anyway. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His voice dropped low, a conspiratorial whisper. "I just overheard your children on the phone. They were talking about selling your property downtown. Something about deposits, paperwork, and splitting the money." I stared at him, unable to form words. My tongue felt thick, useless. He hesitated, then pulled up the chair from the corner and sat across from me. "I know it's not my place," he said gently, "but I thought you should know." The room swam. I clutched the edge of the dresser again, searching for air. All the trust one had clung to, all the reassurances about temporary treatment, about resting, about being cared for, it all shattered like glass dropped on tile. "My house," I whispered finally. "They're selling my house?" Daniel nodded. His eyes were full of pity, but not the condescending kind. Real pity, the kind that aches for you. "They even mentioned what cars they'd buy," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the air vent filled the silence. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and wild. That house wasn't just a piece of property. It was my pension, my safety net, my independence. Every brick, every stair, every window had been cared for with my own hands. It had carried me through widowhood, through raising children, through lonely nights when the only company I had was the sound of tenants' laughter. And now, the people I had built my life around wanted to turn it into quick money. Something inside me broke, and something else hardened. I was no longer simply tired or resigned. I was betrayed. Daniel must have seen the shift in my face. He leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. "Don't lose hope, Mrs. Harper. I've seen this before. You're not powerless. Not if you know the truth." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "What am I supposed to do?" He held my gaze. "First, we look at those papers you signed." Daniel closed the door gently, as if he knew the weight of what we were about to say could not be allowed to leak into the hallway. He sat down across from me, folding his long hands together. For a moment he was quiet, studying my face the way a grandson might when he sees his grandmother is hurting but doesn't know how to help. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly, "I don't want to scare you, but I think you should know something about me before we look at your papers." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. "My grandmother," he began, "owned a farm, 50 acres just outside of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was her pride. She raised chickens, sold eggs at the market, planted rows of corn every spring. She worked that land until her hands were thick with calluses. And then," his voice caught for a moment and he looked down, "then her nephew stole it." I leaned forward, my breath caught in my throat. "He forged her deed," Daniel continued, his voice low, bitter. Said she'd given him power of attorney because she couldn't manage the farm anymore. He sold it right out from under her, took the money, and left her with nothing. She fought him, but by the time she found out, the papers were already stamped and sealed. She died not long after. Not because of her age, she was strong, but because her heart broke. The words settled heavy between us. I thought of my house, my tenants, the 3 stories of brick and wood that had carried me through decades. I thought of my son and daughter laughing on the phone about deposits and cars. And I understood too well what Daniel meant when he said a broken heart can kill. I promised myself, Daniel said firmly, lifting his gaze back to mine, that I'd never stand by and watch something like that happen again. That's why I'm telling you. And if you'll let me, I'll help you. Tears burned the corners of my eyes, though I fought to keep them from falling. Why would you do that for me, dear? Because you remind me of her, he said simply. For the first time in days, I felt the smallest flicker of something other than despair. Hope maybe. Or resolve. I stared at him, this young man with fire in his eyes, and for the first time since I signed those cursed documents, I didn't feel entirely powerless. Still the betrayal cut deep. Daniel, I whispered, how do you survive it? Knowing your own blood could do such a thing? He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, you survive it by refusing to let them win. Outside, the evening sky darkened, and a crow settled on the birdbath just beyond the window, its wings folding neatly at its sides. I watched it for a long moment, steady, unyielding, before turning back to Daniel. All right, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Show me what to do. That night, after Daniel left me with the papers neatly stacked on the dresser, I couldn't sleep. The fluorescent hallway light slipped under my door, and the hum of the air vent filled the silence, but my mind wouldn't rest. I lay on that stiff bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of my house. To my children it was a lump sum, $450,000 in brick and mortar, 6 neat apartments stacked in 3 stories, and $35,000 a year in rent checks. A pot of gold they thought they could split and spend, as if it were loose change in a jar. But to me that house was everything. I could see it as clearly as if I were walking through it. The wide porch with its peeling paint, where I used to sit on summer evenings sipping iced tea and listening to the city hum. The wooden stairwell that groaned underfoot, every creak familiar, like the voice of an old friend. The tenants' laughter drifting through open windows on hot nights, their music and chatter filling the air like proof that the place was alive. I bought that house with my husband when we were young and scrappy, stretching every dollar until it squeaked. He's long gone now, but I remember the way he looked at me the day we signed the papers, like I was his partner, not just his wife. We patched those walls together, painted, fixed leaks, and argued about wallpaper patterns. That house carried our fingerprints in every corner. When he passed, people whispered that I ought to sell. Too much for a widow, they said. You'd be better off with something smaller. But I held on. I collected rent checks, balanced the books, called plumbers when the pipes froze, and climbed ladders myself to change light bulbs in the hallways. Every year, the income from those 6 units was my security, my pension, my independence. I never had to beg, never had to lean too hard on anyone, because that house stood for me. And now my children wanted to strip it away like it was nothing more than a slot machine they'd hit jackpot on. That stung deeper than I can put into words, because in their eyes my years of work, my stubbornness, my dignity, it wasn't worth honoring. It was just money waiting to be spent. I thought of Mark with his confident way of speaking, already dreaming of some shiny car. I thought of Linda, smiling as she pocketed a deposit that wasn't hers to take. And I remembered them as children, Mark building forts in the backyard, Linda playing dress-up in my old clothes. Back then they clung to me. I was the center of their small worlds. Now I was an obstacle. I sat up in bed, clutching the quilt around my shoulders. The ache in my chest was sharp, but it wasn't just grief. It was something harder, something hotter. Anger, maybe. Or determination. Because if there's one thing I learned from years of running that house, it's this: nothing survives without a fight. Roofs don't patch themselves. Pipes don't stop leaking on their own. You roll up your sleeves and you do the work. And I wasn't about to let my life's work vanish without rolling up my sleeves now. I closed my eyes and walked through the house in my mind. The first floor, where Mrs. Gonzalez had lived for 20 years, bringing me tamales every Christmas. The second floor, where the young couple with the new baby had moved in just last spring, nervous and grateful. The third floor, where the college kids kept me laughing with their guitars and noisy dinners. Each tenant wasn't just a rent check. They were people, lives woven into mine. That house wasn't just shelter for me. It was shelter for them. And that made it sacred. I thought about the years I'd worked, scrubbing, patching, saving to keep it afloat. It wasn't handed to me, not by my parents, not by any man. I fought for it. Every mortgage payment was a battle. Every winter heating bill a hurdle. Every broken pipe another round in the ring. And I won. Year after year I won. That house wasn't luck. It was grit. It was proof that I could stand tall, even when life tried to bend me. The betrayal of my children hurt worse because of that. They hadn't just tried to steal a building. They had tried to steal the story of my survival, the foundation of my independence. They wanted to erase me, reduce me to a woman too old, too fragile, too tired to matter. But I wasn't erased. Not yet. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. My body was tired, but my mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear me. They don't get to take this from me. Not my house. Not my life. The words steadied me. For the first time since stepping into Willow Pines, I didn't feel like a woman waiting for something to happen to her. I felt like a woman ready to act. I pulled the papers Daniel had examined from the dresser and set them on my lap. The signatures glared at me, crooked, false, ugly. Proof of betrayal, yes, but also proof of a fight worth taking on. The house was my stake, my life's anchor, and I was not about to let it go. The next afternoon, Daniel knocked gently on my door. He carried a manila folder under his arm and had that look about him. The one people wear when they know they're about to deliver bad news but want to soften it as best they can. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course, dear," I said, though my stomach had already tightened into a knot. He sat down in the chair by the window, laid the folder on his lap, and opened it carefully. Inside were copies of the documents he'd asked one of the nurses, his friend at the desk, to print out from the nursing home's records. He spread them out on the desk, side by side with the papers my children had shoved at me. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his tone steady but kind, "I want you to look closely at these signatures again. Here, this page is the power of attorney." I leaned over, my glasses slipping down my nose. He pointed to the line where my name was scrawled. "You see the P in Harper? Notice how the loop goes backward here but forward in your real signature. And on your genuine papers it closes neatly. On this one it's open, almost like a careless circle." I swallowed hard. "So it's true then. He forged it." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'd stake my life on it. This isn't your hand. It's an imitation. Sloppy but dangerous." My chest ached. I lowered myself into the chair, hands trembling in my lap. "And that gives him the right to sell my house." "Yes," Daniel said carefully. "Legally, it looks like you handed him control. And your daughter, well, it seems she's already taken a deposit from a buyer. $20,000. I pressed a hand to my mouth. 20,000. Felt unreal, like monopoly money. But I knew enough about property to understand what that meant. The wheels of the sale were already turning. Who would buy a house like mine without meeting me? I asked bitterly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Plenty of people if they think they're getting a bargain. A 3-story building downtown? That's prime. And if the seller waives a legal power of attorney, most buyers don't ask questions. They just pay. The room seemed to shrink around me. My little window, the stiff bed, the dresser. It all blurred as my eyes filled with tears I couldn't quite release. They were my children, I whispered. My own blood. And they've done this. Daniel reached across the desk, resting his hand gently on mine. I know it hurts. Believe me, I do. But you have something my grandmother didn't. What's that? My voice shook. You have time, he said firmly. The deal isn't finished yet. There's still a chance to stop it. I sat in silence, staring at the forged pages. My mind replayed the sound of Mark's voice on the phone, low and certain. She'll never know. It's already in motion. And Linda's laugh, bright and greedy. I thought of them as children. Mark running through the sprinkler in the yard. Linda curled against me when thunderstorms rattled the windows. I had loved them with every ounce of myself. And now here they were, carving up my life's work before I was even gone. It felt like mourning a death, but worse. Mourning the death of trust. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window with the paper spread on my lap, the birdbath outside glowing faintly in the moonlight. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my teacup. Around midnight, I picked up the phone on the nightstand. My fingers hovered over the numbers. Calling a lawyer meant opening a door I could never close again. It meant dragging my children into a courtroom, exposing their lies to strangers. It meant admitting that they had betrayed me, not just as a mother but as a human being. But what choice did I have? If I stayed silent, I would lose my house, my income, my independence. Everything I had built would vanish, and I would be left to rot in a place where no one remembered my name. I pressed the numbers with trembling fingers. The phone rang once, twice, and then a calm voice answered. Law offices of Henderson and Myers. How may I help you? My name is Margaret Harper, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough. I need to speak with someone about a forged power of attorney. Concerns my property. There was a pause on the line. Then the receptionist's tone shifted to something brisker. Yes, ma'am. We can arrange a consultation immediately. Do you have documents? Yes, I whispered, glancing at the stack on my lap. I do. When I hung up, the silence in the room felt different. Not heavy this time. Not suffocating. It felt like the quiet that comes just before a storm breaks. I looked out the window at the crow perched on the birdbath, black against the pale moonlight. We'll fight, I murmured to it as if it were my witness. They won't take it from me. Not without a fight. And for the first time since stepping into Willow Pines, I felt more like myself again. Not a frail old woman tucked away, but Margaret Harper, who had patched roofs, balanced accounts, raised children, and built a life from nothing. My children had made a terrible mistake. They thought I was too old, too tired, too trusting. They forgot the most important thing. I may have been weary, but I was not powerless. The morning of the hearing, I rose before dawn. Sleep had been thin, more tossing than resting, but I dressed with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. I chose my navy skirt, the one with the pressed pleats, and my pearl brooch, a gift from my husband long ago. If my children wanted to paint me as weak, fragile, and confused, I would walk in looking like the woman who had held a house together through storms and scarcity. Daniel had insisted on accompanying me. He met me at the entrance of Willow Pines, holding the door like a grandson would, his tie slightly crooked. "Ready, Mrs. Harper?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands trembled around my purse. Inside that purse were the papers, both mine and theirs, proof of a forgery and of betrayal, proof that I had been right to make the hardest call of my life. The courthouse loomed ahead, cold and gray against the morning sky. I had walked past it countless times in younger years, never imagining I'd be here for anything more than jury duty. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and old paper. My lawyer, Mr. Lawson, met us in the lobby. He was a man in his 50s, graying at the temples, with a voice that carried calm even in the most unsettling moments. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Harper," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "We'll make the truth clear today." The courtroom itself was colder than I expected, the kind of place where even laughter would sound out of place. Wooden benches lined the space, and at the front, the judge's bench loomed high above us all. My children sat on the opposite side of the room. Mark looked confident, almost smug, leaning back in his chair as if this were just another business meeting. Linda sat with her arms folded, her smile tight but unshaken. Seeing them there, facing me like adversaries, made my stomach twist. These were the children I had rocked to sleep, kissed on scraped knees, prayed for every night. Now they were the ones trying to undo me. When the case was called, we all stood. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, took her seat. Mr. Lawson began by laying out the facts. The sudden signing of papers, my children's insistence on temporary treatment, and the suspicious transactions that followed. He placed the forged power of attorney on the evidence table, pointing out the discrepancies in the signature. "Mrs. Harper has lived independently for years," he said firmly. "She has managed a 6-unit property, balanced her finances, and cared for her tenants without issue. There was no need for such a document, except for her children's greed." As he spoke, I felt my heart thumping like a drum. Each word was both a dagger and a shield. Then it was my children's turn. Mark leaned forward, his voice smooth. "Our mother has been struggling. She forgets things, leaves bills unpaid, confuses names. We were only trying to protect her. The power of attorney was necessary to ensure her well-being." Linda chimed in, her voice sugary sweet. "We love her. We only wanted to make sure she was taken care of." I wanted to shout, to tell the judge about the phone call, the laughter, the talk of cars. But I stayed silent, trusting Mr. Lawson to guide the fight. He called Daniel as a witness. My heart swelled as the young man walked to the stand, his back straight, his voice steady. He told the court what he'd overheard. The talk of selling my house, the down payment already pocketed. He told them about the forged letters in my signature, pointing them out with the same careful eye he had shown me. My children shifted in their seats, Mark's jaw tightening, Linda's smile faltering. For the first time they looked uneasy. I was then asked to take the stand. My knees wobbled as I walked forward, but once seated, I found my voice steadier than I expected. I told the truth, not with anger but with sorrow. About the day they sat me down, about the papers I signed out of trust and fatigue, about the silence that followed when I was left in the nursing home. "I am 72, I said, looking straight at the judge. "I may be older, but I am not helpless. I managed my property, my tenants, my life. What I did not expect was that my own children would see me not as a mother to love, but as money to divide. That is the deepest wound of all." The room fell into a hush. Even the judge leaned back, her expression unreadable, though I thought I saw the faintest flicker of sympathy in her eyes. When I stepped down, my hands trembled, but I held my head high. Across the room, Mark and Linda avoided my gaze. The evidence was on the table. The lies were unraveling. But the fight wasn't over yet. And just as the judge seemed ready to make her decision, the courtroom doors opened with a quiet creak. A woman stepped inside. Someone I knew, though I hadn't expected to see her here. One of my tenants. And in that moment I felt the tide begin to turn. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised at the interruption. "Your Honor," Mr. Lawson said quickly, standing. "This is Mrs. Harper's tenant. She has requested to testify." The judge looked over her glasses. "Is her testimony relevant to the case?" Mr. Lawson's voice was steady. "Yes, ma'am. Directly." After a pause, the judge nodded. Very well. Proceed. Marjorie took the stand, smoothing her skirt before folding her hands. She looked nervous at first, but when her eyes found mine, her chin lifted. Mrs. Harper has been my landlord for 15 years, she began. And I'll tell you this, she is not some fragile woman who can't manage her affairs. She's been fair, reliable, and kind. When my husband lost his job a few years back, she let us stay rent-free for 3 months until we got back on our feet. She said, "Marjorie, family helps family." That's the kind of woman she is. Her words struck something deep in me. I remembered that day well. Handing her the keys with a smile, telling her not to worry. To me it had been simple decency. To her it had been a lifeline. Marjorie took a breath, her voice growing stronger. But that's not all. A few weeks ago, Mrs. Harper's children came to me. They told me I'd need to start looking for a new place because the building was already sold. Already sold. She let the words hang in the air. They said I should start packing. But when I asked Mrs. Harper about it, she looked at me confused, like it was news to her. That's when I realized something wasn't right. The judge's eyes narrowed. You're saying the children informed tenants that the property had already been sold before this matter was brought to court? Yes, ma'am, Marjorie replied firmly. They spoke of it as if it were a done deal. I stole a glance at my children across the room. Mark shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. Linda kept her arms crossed, but her smile was gone, replaced by a hard line. Mr. Lawson leaned forward, seizing the moment. Your Honor, this testimony demonstrates not only deceit but intent. They weren't protecting their mother. They were preparing to evict tenants and pocket profits from a fraudulent sale. The judge tapped her pen against her notes, her expression thoughtful. Duly noted. I felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't felt in weeks, relief. Not victory, not yet, but relief that I wasn't standing alone. When Marjorie stepped down, she passed by my seat. For just a second, she touched my shoulder, a small gesture. But it steadied me more than any lawyer's argument. Her quiet presence said, "You matter. You are believed." The hearing pressed on, but the air in the room had changed. My children no longer looked untouchable. Their confidence had cracked. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. Mr. Lawson pressed his advantage. He highlighted the forged signature, the premature deposit, and now the testimony of a tenant whose life would have been uprooted by their greed. Piece by piece, the mask they had worn, of dutiful, concerned children, was stripped away. Mark tried to recover, his voice rising with frustration. She doesn't understand. Mom has been declining. We had to step in before she ruined everything. But the words fell flat. Declining? The judge had just heard proof that I was still capable, still steady. She had heard from a tenant who trusted me more than my own children did. Linda attempted sweetness, but it rang hollow. We were only trying to protect her. The judge raised her hand, silencing them. What I see, she said evenly, is a pattern of deception. A forged document, financial gain, and a direct attempt to mislead tenants. This is not protection. This is exploitation. My heart beat so hard I thought the whole room might hear it. The gavel didn't fall that day. There were still formalities, still arguments to be made. But in that moment I felt the tide turn. The truth was no longer locked inside my chest, weighing me down like a stone. It was out there, spoken aloud, undeniable. When the session ended, I gathered my purse and stood. My knees ached, but I stood tall. Across the aisle, my children avoided my eyes. For all their confidence, they suddenly looked very small. As Daniel and Mr. Lawson guided me toward the doors, I glanced back one last time at Marjorie. She gave me a firm nod, like a soldier saluting before battle. And in that nod, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: strength. Not just my own but borrowed strength, the kind that comes when someone chooses to stand beside you. For the first time since this ordeal began, I believed I might win. The next day, the air in the courtroom grew heavier after Marjorie's testimony. My children sat tensely in their seats, their faces pale, their confidence shattered. For the first time I saw fear in their eyes. Mr. Lawson gave his closing remarks, laying the pieces together like bricks. The forged signature, the premature deposit, the deception of tenants. "This is not care," he said firmly. "This is fraud. Plain and simple." Mark tried one last time, his voice raised, almost desperate. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's confused, she's been declining." The judge silenced him with a sharp look. Linda leaned back, her arms folded tightly across her chest, but she said nothing. I sat still, my hands folded, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo through the room. At last the judge spoke. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "This court finds the documents presented to be fraudulent. The attempted sale of the Harper property is hereby nullified. Furthermore, the defendants are ordered to pay $40,000 in damages for fraud and moral harm." The gavel struck. The sound rang through me like a bell. I exhaled, the breath I'd been holding for weeks leaving me in a rush. Relief filled me, but it was heavy, almost sorrowful. I had won back my house, yes, but the cost was my trust in the very children I had once carried in my arms. Across the aisle, Mark and Linda sat motionless, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding mine. For the first time they looked small. I rose slowly, leaning on the strength in my bones, and walked out with my head held high. Justice at least was mine. The day after the verdict I returned home. The key still fit the lock, though my hand trembled as I turned it. The door opened with the same familiar creak, and for a moment, I just stood there on the threshold, letting the smell of my own house wash over me. Wood polish, dust, and something faintly sweet from the kitchen tiles that had soaked up years of baking. The rooms were unchanged. The stair rail still bore the dent from when Mark crashed his toy truck years ago. The window in the front room still stuck when you pushed it too hard. The house had waited for me, patient, as if it knew I would return. I sat by the window in the parlor, my favorite chair angled toward the street. The city outside moved as it always had, children racing on bicycles, a dog barking 2 houses down, a bus rumbling past. Life had not stopped for my trial. It never does. The papers from the court lay neatly stacked on the table beside me. The judgment was clear. The house was mine, the fraudulent sale undone, the damages owed. On paper it was victory, but my heart felt heavier than I had expected. Winning back the house didn't erase the truth I now carried like a stone in my chest. My own children, my blood, my babies, had been willing to gamble away my life for money. They had looked at me not as a mother to cherish, but as an obstacle to remove. I traced a finger along the edge of the quilt draped over the chair, stitched from scraps of old dresses. My children once curled beneath that quilt when thunder shook the night. I remembered their small hands gripping mine, their voices calling out, "Mama." Now silence. I promised myself as I sat in that chair that never again would I hand over my strength so easily. Age may have lined my face and stiffened my joints, but it had not stolen my will. I may be old, but I am not powerless. The house stood tall outside my window, and so would I. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.